Hello, and welcome to another episode in my Therapist Plays Disco Elysium analysis series. So, this time I wanted to share something that I learned about a particular character in the game and also some things that I learned about myself in the course of uploading this series. So, just for context, if you're just coming into this now, the way I'm kind of playing through the game is from like the perspective of being a therapist and trying to provide as much commentary as I can on different angles of mental health that are depicted in the game. There's a lot more going on than just that in Disco Elysium, but I'm not the person to comment on like complicated political stuff. And one of the most important dynamics in the game is the one that you have with your partner, Kim Kitsuragi. And I recognize that like as the player, we're going to be a lot more aware of Kim's qualities than my character, the detective, will. And so, in my role play of him, I've sort of been exploring the subject of someone who is coming from a background of trauma, which we still don't know a lot about Raphael from where I'm at in the game. But a lot of his issues with the way he views authority and relationships and his struggles with substance abuse kind of indicate that there may be some of that background present. So I've been kind of approaching a lot of the dialogue with Kim from this perspective that like we tend to have an initial first impression about someone that we may want to trust them, but if we're someone who has a lot of trust issues, we may sort of like test that relationship over time. We may kind of see where the real boundaries are. And from my character's perspective, he's kind of been trying to see like, does Kim stick around with me because he needs me to complete this case? Or are the qualities that we immediately picked up on, that he is earnest and trustworthy and a very honest character at heart, are those things going to last when we make ourselves very difficult to be around, basically?
I'm definitely going to ask him. I really want to impress him, and I want him to think that I'm cool and that I'm not a mess.
I've been kind of trying to demonstrate that like some of the closest relationships you can have are ones that have really been put through that test and have outlasted that period of like, if I push this person far enough, are they still going to stick with me?
A sigh. The lieutenant buries his nose in his notebook.
See, there's another thing that I'm not sure about Kim. The way that she spoke to me just now, she's giving an honest reflection and she's empathizing with me. Whereas Kim is showing me disappointment and he's showing me mistrust. Like maybe I am too brain damaged to be useful to him.
And so, as Brady, the player, I can see that, these are genuine qualities in Kim. But from the perspective of my character, there's still some distance there and still some things that we're trying to kind of put through that test. So that's been kind of one of my goals with the playthrough. But in the last episode, we had one of our first like real one-on-one exchanges with Kim. And in that conversation, I was actually hoping to like instigate some tension between these two characters to sort of like kind of push that conversation about like what does it look like to push through a barrier of trust between two people. And I was doing so by trying to also use an approach that is sometimes useful in therapy for kind of like getting someone to talk more openly about subjects that may be uncomfortable to them, as kind of a way to like push the boundaries of our relationship with Kim to a point where we are openly challenging some of the ideas that may present tension between us and actually start to work through them and build some of that trust between us. So this is kind of what that looks like. The idea here is that we often try to deal with our emotions in a very sort of like intellectual way, meaning that we're talking about them, but the emotions that are attached to a difficult subject are not present with us. We're discussing something like that we went through a breakup or something, but we're sort of giving more of like a historical, analytical account of it, more so than getting in touch with the emotions that might actually be present there. And the reason that we intellectualize things is because it keeps our anxiety low, right? I'm talking about something and I'm sort of trying to avoid really the uncomfortable feelings that might be present there. And yet some of the best processing work that we can do is going to take place in this like zone where the psychological work actually happens when there's a little bit of that anxiety present, right? When we sort of break through the like layers and layers of defense mechanisms and avoidance that we're having to not actually get in touch with those uncomfortable feelings. And so sometimes the approach, if I see someone intellectualizing, I might try to push a little bit into that subject, kind of try to raise the anxiety a little bit. And it's very common for people to kind of retreat back into intellectualizing and sort of avoid that. And so you may need to push a little harder, right? And you're trying to get that person to a point where they're feeling enough of the emotion to talk about it without going too far, right? And then we end up sort of in a crisis situation. It's a tricky thing to manage, and this is kind of what I was trying to show in the dialogue with Kim, but it was in the pursuit of trying to demonstrate this and kind of analyze the dynamics at play that I started to get things very wrong about Kim and really what the whole conversation we were having was actually about. The conversation that we were having was about Kim's cultural heritage, and he's explaining to me that he has no attachments to Seoul. He calls himself a regular garden variety revacholier. And it's pretty evident that this conversation makes him feel uncomfortable. Kim is tired of people assuming that he has some sort of connection to his Seolite ancestry, when really that's never been a part of his history. And it's frustratingly common for him to feel like people don't consider him a genuine revacholier because he doesn't necessarily look like the other people in the country. And so while we were in this dialogue, I was sort of looking for ways to raise the tension so that I could sort of like talk about what this dynamic can look like when someone really gets in touch with an uncomfortable emotion. But I got the wrong read on why he was becoming uncomfortable. And some of the assumptions that, not just from my character's point of view, but also in my own thinking, had some prejudices in. And at the time, a lot of my focus was on just trying to sort of like increase the tension so that I could, talk about this therapeutic technique. But I think that's really where the problem actually starts for me, which is that I wasn't thinking as much about how people who relate to Kim in real life feel when questions like this come up. And so I carried on with that conversation and continued the playthrough. And then it was after I published that episode that I started to get a lot of comments that pointed this out to me. People shared their perspectives of how they relate to Kim and how it is very common for people to assume that they must have an inherent attachment to their heritage's culture and that they must feel conflicted about this, which is kind of where my line of questioning towards Kim was coming from. It may come from a place of genuine curiosity, but there are prejudices inlaid in that assumption that go overlooked. And so I'm sorry to anyone for whom this brought up these kinds of hurtful feelings. And even though it wasn't intentional, I know that I'm responsible for what I say and for the way it makes other people feel. I am so appreciative of this community and for the people who shared their experiences in the comments of that video, because it was done in such a respectful and truly informative way. This was something that I needed some education on, and so I'm also very thankful for that as well. The other part that I wanted to talk about in this video is actually just how I reflected on this whole situation and kind of discovered some things that actually make me uncomfortable about myself. So after I published the video, I started to get some comments that were, strongly disagreeing with everything that I had to say about Kim, and they were right about every single one. But looking back on it now, I can see that like some of my first replies were rather defensive, and that's just the honest truth. I thought that I was being criticized for having a misunderstanding and that this would be sort of mistaken for genuine bigotry. And so my first couple of replies were sort of focused on like trying to explain that I didn't mean that, and I was not going at it from that angle, and here's what I really meant to talk about, and it wasn't the right way to go about that either. I shouldn't have been trying to like explain that I meant no offense, and really just should have started listening and accepting what people had to say. So I was being defensive, and like I hate this about myself. Like I don't like that that's my first reaction to being uncomfortable, um, which is really, it's kind of exactly what I was demonstrating in my whole little chart here. Like honestly, it's kind of amusing, I guess, to see that like what I experienced is a better demonstration of this principle than whatever the I was trying to say in the video, and just totally blew it. Here I am, like trying to come at a very intellectual angle with like, no, I didn't mean that. Here's what I really meant. I was actually trying to explain this thing. No, like what I was doing is avoiding my own anxiety, you know? And the more that people started to comment and share their experiences, and I just kind of realized not only was my take on like Kim's character just totally wrong, but it was also upsetting and hurtful to people who relate to him and have to deal with similar things all the time. I never wanted to like confront people's real issues that way, but like I said, intention or not, like that's what happens. And realizing that like my mistake could have upset someone to that degree, like my anxiety started going up like a lot. And I was going to stream that evening, and I decided not to because like I was probably a little bit higher up here. Like I really felt this just wouldn't be a good idea. You know, I'm not feeling good about myself, and I have some like self-reflection to do here. Um, and it was actually when I went back and started to read some of the comments and reread them and realized that like no one there was attacking me. Like they were just sharing their experiences, trying to inform me, that my anxiety started to come down. And legitimately, it's there that I started to think a lot more clearly on why I actually had that reaction to begin with. So I realized that I not only need to apologize for, you know, what was said, but I also just needed to reflect a lot on myself here. I needed to see that the reason I became so defensive at first and then anxious after that was that I actually do have some biases and prejudices and assumptions that I didn't even know I had, right? And it was only after being sort of like very uncomfortably confronted by that did I start to detect like, okay, this avoidance you're having is because there are some misinformed and overlooked assumptions that you have that make you feel uncomfortable, and you don't like realizing that, you know, not every thought that crosses your mind is going to be formed in absolute perfection before you say it. And that scares me. But it's also like just natural. And, you know, I'm trying to learn as much as I can from this experience. And I understand that even some of what I'm doing right here is a little bit of intellectualizing, but like what is true and honest is that the other day I felt like just really beside myself with disappointment, but that's okay. You know, it's okay to feel that way sometimes, because what it has brought to me is, you know, a little bit more awareness, and helped me just see a little bit more where people were coming from. For that, I'm also sorry, but I'm also very thankful to those of you who helped me learn something new about myself, and just reminding me that, you know, there's definitely some areas that I have to do some work on too. You know, this whole process is not something I'm unfamiliar with, and it's really why I wanted to bring it up in the first place, because I do really believe that there's some things that are a little too below the surface that you don't even really know are there, and it takes a certain kind of confrontation to actually like put them in front of you and like make you a little uncomfortable, like, oh wow, I didn't even really know that I had that kind of assumption. Like that makes me really uncomfortable. So like, what do I need to do to start working on it? And like, I know how to manage that when it comes to like doing therapy with someone else, and how to sort of like safely bring them to that point, and, you know, make sure that like we're developing insight around this and not going down a path of like major self-criticism, which is something I tend to do. But it's really hard to do sometimes when it's yourself and it's your own issues that need attention. So that's just something that I really wanted to say about all of this. And, the fact that a game like Disco Elysium exists and has so many complicated layers to it and can be the cause of genuine self-discovery, good and bad, just continues to amaze me and makes me, even more excited to keep playing it. So my understanding of Kim has definitely changed as a result of this. But that's like speaking for myself. For my character, I do think that there is something worth exploring on the subject of like the two of them not immediately starting to get along. I do expect that between my detective and Kim, there are still some things to sort of work on, and that, it's still going to take some time before we warm up to each other. So for the sake of the role play, there may still be times where we confront each other, but I will definitely be in a better perspective with myself as we explore those subjects and talk about them. That's been one of the most interesting parts of the playthrough so far, is just how much discussion this stimulates, including this one. So I'm really curious to see where we go from here. So thank you again for everyone who shared their perspective with me. I just appreciate the way that everyone is engaging with this series. It's been more impactful to me than I think I'm even really able to show here. And look, I know that I'm also just like generally trash at playing the game. Like, our playthrough is a total mess. I'm missing all kinds of important things, and that's something that I'll try to work on as well. So with that said, I'll see you all in the next one.